Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I now call to order this work session of the Anchorage Assembly on snow removal. It is Thursday, January 5, 2023. We are noticed from 2:40 to 3:40 p.m. It is 2:47 p.m. and I apologize for our late start. We ran a little bit over with our last work session. Thanks everyone for your patience. I want to note also, actually, I don't believe we have any documents for this meeting, do we? So there's nothing posted online. We will go ahead and start with Assembly member introductions for the record.
Pete Peterson. Randy Salt.
Felix Rivera. Kevin Cross.
Meg Zalatel.
Christopher Constant.
Suzanne LaFrance. And do we have Ms. Quinn Davidson on the phone? No members on the phone? Also at the table, we are joined by
Paul Van Lanningham, Manager, MOA Street Maintenance.
Saxon Shear, Director, M&O. Lance Wilbur, Director of Community and Economic Development.
Adam Trombley, Chief of Staff.
Dean Gates, Assembly Councilman.
And from the clerk's office,
Desiree Camacho, Assembly Budget Analyst.
Okay, thank you all for being here today. And thank you to Mr. Trombley for offering to hold this briefing and work session for the Assembly. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Mr. Trombley.
Sure, and I'm going to turn it over to the folks here at the table. I thought it'd be good. I know you guys are getting peppered with questions, news reports, those kind of things regarding snow removal. So I thought it'd be really good to just update you guys on what we've done so far and what we plan on doing in the future.
All right. Again, my name's Lance Wilbur. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the Assembly. To start off, I know that many of you have been forwarding a lot of emails, a lot of questions about snow removal. And again, yesterday when we had our conversation about at the Health Policy Committee, we heard a lot of concerns about sidewalk maintenance and the ability and for public transportation and pedestrians. And what we want to do today is just share with you the things that we are doing, the progress that we have made, the places that we're going. I'm going to start off with some highlights. Then I'll turn it over to Saxton and Paul, who probably have a lot more details, kind of what we're doing on the day-to-day operation. So that will be the general approach. And again, Madam Chair, if some of you guys have questions, just let us know right away, and then we'll do our best to respond to those. And the answers we don't have, we will get back to you so you can respond to your constituents as well. So, before I start, I want to say that the last month has been not normal and it relates to snowfall, and the folks over at street maintenance and our folks at our fleet shop, in order to keep the equipment running, and our street maintenance crew and the work that they've been doing, not only internally, but with the support of the contractors. We've been able to bring some other folks on board inside and working inside the Anchorage area. We've also had some support with some of the other departments, and I really appreciate the work that Paul and his crew has done, Saxton and the shop over there. They just really been doing a really good job. And out in Chugiak and Eagle River, we know that the McKenna brothers, who is the contractor for the folks out in Eagle River, have really been doing the best that they can as well. And obviously the state has a lot of responsibility for the roads that they're doing, and they're working as best they can, and we're working cooperatively. We'll talk a little bit about that, not only in the operations, but also in the snow hauling itself. So I just wanted to start off with that piece. Our crews right now, we're continuing to work night and day. We're not taking any, they're working pretty much round the clock, widening the streets. We're doing some hauling right now. We brought on some additional crews that are going to be helping with cul-de-sac and snow removal in cul-de-sacs. Normally, we typically don't do that until later in the spring here. One of the focus areas that maybe Paul will add on to here a little bit, but one of the focus areas we're working on right now is making sure that we're doing hauling around the 34 elementary schools, because we know that's when school gets started on Monday. Want to make sure that those particularly those areas are getting some prompt attention right now. As of this morning, we have hauled almost 25,000 truckloads of snow, over almost 500,000 cubic yards of snow. We're hauling about 1,600 loads a day. And as an example, in the downtown, normally we haul 6,000 truckloads a year, all year. Just to date, we've hauled about 6,600. We haven't got to Ronde, we haven't got to Iditarod, and we haven't got to the winter, the spring. So a lot of work has been done to date. The other thing I just want to mention, we had a bunch of questions, and I think Assemblymember LaFrance, you sent me some questions, and I'll try to address those. Talk, really how are our people doing? How's our equipment doing? Do we have enough equipment? And, basically all of the equipment that we have 30 grader operators, and pretty much on an average day, we have 25 to 28 of those in operation. They break, we have parts that we have to fix. So that's just inside our own crew. We've been able to hire some more people. We started off sort of early in the year with about roughly 50 to 60. We're up to about 72 internally here. And then we've brought all other contractors on, and I think we can talk a little bit more about the capacity as there. I did mention that, we're using some equipment with solid waste. We're using some help from Public Works, from AWWU, to bring additional trucks in to haul all the amount of snow that we have around Anchorage. As far as maintenance is concerned, yeah, Pete?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Someone asked today at our Community and Economic Development Committee meeting if they were going to work with the school district to try to get to use their graders and to try to help out. And has that already happened?
I know that we're working through an agreement with them. I don't know if that is the case. Paul may know, but I don't know if we were able to pull that off.
Okay, thanks.
And again, just a couple last couple things here regarding the ability to maintain equipment. Inside our fleet shop, we just have one equipment tech that we are not able to fill. We just can't find a qualified candidate. It's not that we don't have the ability to get folks out there. It's just not finding the person that can get out there or get in the shop and help us. But as far as parts, we don't lack basic regular parts that we normally break. Obviously, that is changing quickly because across the country, the type of equipment that we are using, other people are using it too. So the types of parts that we're looking at, there's some unique parts to our equipment. If you haven't looked inside a road grader lately, it's run by joysticks. It's a lot of electronics. And so we have some of those parts there, microchips and pieces that we need to get fixed. And I think we only have one grader that has that challenge right now. It's one piece of equipment. And so that's important to know. I think I'll let Paul and those guys talk about snow dump sites, but we are working with the state. They have some snow dump sites. We have some snow dump sites. We're trying to do the best that we can to limit the distance in haul as it relates to that. And when they start hauling, we will work cooperatively so that they can limit the amount of distance they have to travel so they can get their stuff done as fast as possible. And then the last piece I'll mention as it relates to snow dump sites, because I know that you probably have a host of questions that I'm not addressing. And that is in working with maintenance and operation and our folks in development services, we have a draft ordinance that was put together. I think the Health Policy Committee mentioned it yesterday. So we can put some requirements to allow a temporary storage of private snow dumps in particular parcels of property. There will be requirements that will be allowed, but that will be able to streamline the permitting process. And basically, this is allowing private property to use their parcels if they have them with a minimum amount of size. There's going to be requirements for signage and timing and noise and use. And it's for those of you who may be familiar with the ordinance that we did in 2012. This one pretty much looks very much like that. It'll really provide some relief to private contractors where they can access sites closer than they might otherwise, because they're hauling parking lots. They're hauling a lot of other places as well. So look forward to seeing that one inside the assembly workflow. And if you have questions on that. So again, we're going around the clock, and we've been doing it, and we're bringing more resources on as much as we can. But the typical 84-hour plow out that we do, an 84-hour plow out means this. It means once, and this is on municipal streets only, not the state ones. A plow out means once we hit 4 inches of snow on the ground, we plow all of our streets. When those streets are done plowed, we go into our neighborhoods. That's when the clock clock starts. And that's plowing those streets to remove the snow off those streets. And obviously the amount of time it takes us to, plow the snow in those streets, it's taking longer because there's not as much place to put the snow, running into, just space on the street due to the volume of snow. So, Madam Chair, that's sort of my some initial opening comments, and I'll let you guys ask questions, and we'll let Paul and Saxon address the best you can.
Thank you, Mr. Wilburn. I want to note for the record, we were joined by Ms. Quinn Davidson at 2:50, and Ms. Zalatel is in the queue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have two questions. So for the mechanic position we can't seem to fill, can we contract with some contract services to help fill that need because the need is acute?
Through the chair, a very good question. And we do even send some of our equipment to the dealer to have maintenance. It's not all done in-house. So if we need to have the equipment maintained, we send it to the Caterpillar dealer and maintain it. This one here would be doing other duties, but I can find out how much is actually being contracted out. And I don't believe this position has been vacant that long.
Okay, thanks. The other question I had was, you explained when the 84-hour clock starts, and it's not what my understanding was. So one, can you say it again? And two, can we clarify this on the website? Because I can tell you, my constituents have their watches out and they start their 84-hour clock once we hit the time. And then they're like, okay, it's been 84 hours. Why isn't everything done? So it sounds like it's not a straight 84 hours.
I'll do the last one first. Yes, we will clarify it. And to repeat, and Paul can correct me if I'm wrong, but basically after 4 inches hits the ground, we start plowing municipal streets. The main streets, the collectors, the arterials, the ones that we own. So, basically any major street that leaves a subdivision that goes to a traffic signal is ours. The Strawberries, the Wisconsins, those types of those. Once all of those have been done and it stopped snowing and it's not still snowing, we go into the neighborhoods. If it snows 4 inches and then it snows another 4 inches, we go back to the streets. If it snows another 8 inches, we go back to the streets. When all of that is done, then we go into the neighborhoods and we start that 84-hour clock. And we start at different parts of town. And this is just for the Anchorage Bowl. It is not how Chugach Eagle River or Girdwood or the Hillside operate. That's the way they operate, is through different contracts. So they manage it differently. So if you're in Eagle River, that 84-hour plow out does not apply. If you live pretty much every place east of Lake Otis, or at least further up the hill, it does not apply. It's a different time.
Can I ask one more follow-up? Thanks. So if we are mostly done with the arterials and collectors and MOA streets, and we start on, I'm just trying to think of the timing, like we're all around town and we start on some neighborhood roads, but that doesn't mean that we wouldn't do them concurrently, right? After we've primarily gotten done the arterials and the collectors. Like, it's not like, okay, all these streets are absolutely done. Now we're dispersing to the neighborhoods, right? Like, I'm just trying to get the logistics down, because when people watch the map, and so if they see, oh, well, this piece of Wisconsin isn't done, but now I see they're over in a neighborhood down on the other side of town, it's because Wisconsin's about to be finished, likely, right?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and let Paul handle this one.
Yes, through the chair. So we have 4 units, units 1, 2, 3, and 4, basically northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest Anchorage. Once the snow falls, we have arterial groups or teams working all of the main roads in each one of those units. As a unit is finished, they may start into residentials within that unit while simultaneously the other 3 teams are finishing theirs. It's not hour for hour or minute for minute that they'll all finish at the same time, but it's close. And then depending on the conditions, if a team finishes, say we get a heavier snowfall in West Anchorage than we would in East Anchorage, that team on the east side, before they would go into residentials, may go over and help. We try and time it as close to possible to where residentials are starting pretty well the same time, but there could be an hour or 2 or 3 right there that something is getting started in a residential area, say in Unit 4, when Unit 2 mains are still being completed.
Great, thank you. I think this is the blessing and curse of technology, and that we're giving some real-time information. It then takes a lot of context. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Alatel. Next in the queue is Mr. Constant, then Mr. Cross.
Thanks. Just a couple questions. I heard a rumor out there that the assembly had somehow refused to purchase equipment for snow maintenance and management this year. Do you have any remembrance of that? No, it doesn't exist, right? Thanks. We've been pretty on top of that. The issue now that I'm trying to get my mind around is how we're contracting for support services. We've had some emails from folks that raise a number of questions. And so I understand it's not quite an emergency. No emergency was declared. I would say the folks walking in the snowbanks feel it's pretty much an emergency. But from a posture of the municipality, it hasn't been. But we are flexing our purchasing processes. And so when will we know what we're paying per hour for these contracted guns coming in and doing this work for us? Because at the same time we have to get this done, we also have to mind the fisc.
So we do have those additional contracts on for the hourly rate that we negotiated with them before we brought them on. So the original snow hauling contractor that we have on board, we were struggling, or they were struggling, to actually bring some equipment on to meet the need that we had, even though we increased the amount of rate to do that. They continued to struggle with that, so we brought on additional resources for hauling. Those costs for their hauling and the types of equipment, because we brought in different types of equipment, so we could haul more snow.
Right.
Those prices were negotiated as well.
So the question is, when will we see that information so we understand what the burn rate is and what we need to be mindful of?
I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Saxton or Paul on that one.
Mr. Constant, we're tracking each contract separately. So since we brought in McKenna, we're leveraging the Eagle River contract, snow haul contract. We're using side dumps. We're using 15 side dumps, which is almost double the capacity of a typical end dump. To use side dumps in this capacity, the way we're doing now, has never been done before on a onesie twosie situation hauling, but never at the magnitude that we're doing now. So it's increased our efficiency of our operation, and we're able to haul a lot more snow off the main corridors. We can't get side dumps into the residential areas, so we're heavily dependent on those end dumps. Leveraging Northern Gravel, Baxter Construction from the LRSA contract on the hillside. These are all options available to us. You're right, they do have a ceiling, a threshold that we can't exceed. And so you're going to likely see some of that come forth to the assembly for approval if we get close to that ceiling. And I believe we're preparing documents. And then also we have the supplemental haul contract that you'll see on Tuesday. We have an apparent low bidder, and to hopefully bring on more end dumps. The end dumps, again, are very surgical in those residential tight to fit cul-de-sac areas. And then we also have Spurnack and Sons, and that's also an option to us to leverage an existing term contract. Right now we're leveraging the Parks and Rec term contract for Spurnack and Sons construction. And so we have a team of exclusive, at the direction of street maintenance, tackling cul-de-sacs. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, that's 1,309 cul-de-sacs. And Spurnack is tackling, at their direction, the most troubled areas, so we can accommodate school buses and EMS services first for those areas that are heavily constrained.
So you tapped into one area that I still have been unable to wrap my mind around, the methodology. When we're using the Eagle River contract or the Hillside contract or the Parks and Rec contract, Parks and Rec, that one's maybe easier to grasp. What contracting vehicle are we using to leverage those contracts? Is it written into the contracts when they sign them that although they're paid for out of Subursa and the regional funds over there, that they may be called upon to provide services in ARTSA, or the same for the LRSA up on the hillside? Or is it in their contract that they may be called upon and paid for by ARTSA money?
I mean, through the chair, Mr. Constant, the contracts have language that allow the use of adjusting the geographical scope of work, same scope of work in a different geographical region to a limit. We're still subject to the terms of the contract for the ceiling and the thresholds. We benefit from known unit pricing. We know before we call those services what it's going to cost per truck per hour, and that hour unit. The unit quantity is defined as the size of the truck, the quantity it hauls, accommodated by an operator. That's the unit price. To keep it relevant, this is the exact situation that we use through the Assembly's approval to use McKenna and McKenna Brothers for the Highland Avalanche effort.
Right, but the problem there, the difference, if you will, is that the Subursa road service area, Highland is in it. And so there are, to me, are a lot of questions about what are the mechanics that allowed, there was some document that was published by Mr. Colhase that said, despite what you hear on social media, we're not issuing sole source contracts. Instead, we're using Subursa. That was like a red flag to me because Subursa is a different road service area. And if we're being creative on how we adopt contracts or implement contracts, take from there to pay for here when we have different funding sources, we need to know what's going on because it's gray. So, and it's the same with the Hillside Parks and Rec. Again, Parks and Rec, it's regional service. That makes more sense. But those outlying areas that pay for their own business, their own contracts, I don't understand the mechanics.
Through the chair, Mr. Constant, I can confirm that Mr. Colhase can sympathize with that concern. We have literature that's going to be coming forth to the Assembly to spell out those arrangements. And so the Assembly will be seeing that document very soon.
Okay, I just hope that the literature includes the terms of the contracts. Thanks.
Thank you. Next in the queue is Mr. Cross, then Mr. Solt, then Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, to build off that, it is overwhelmingly apparent, at least in my district in Eagle River, where that lack of synergy between the state and the municipality. You can literally see it like a line in the ground. You can tell where Subursa is and where you're waiting on the state to do Eagle River Road. And to see these giant plow trucks with their blades up driving 12 and 13 miles to service neighborhoods, but they're not dropping their blades because that's state. And whatever that line is, that is an insult to the taxpayer because this is a group effort, state and municipality. And why they can't just drop their blades and why they're not compensated for that, or hey, it's a different organization, whatever it is an asinine argument because it's at the detriment of everybody who lives there. The fact that all the neighborhoods are plowed days in advance of the state roads that service them is completely asinine. And I wish somebody from the state was here to explain like why you don't cooperate better with us and why we have heavy equipment going to clear out miles and miles in neighborhoods, but they can't cover that long stretch of road on the way there. That's all over in District 2. I'm sure it is in other places of Anchorage. I'm just not aware. So that inefficiency is glowing because those graders, those individuals, that would free up that state grader to go do something else that's critical, right? It's just blatant inefficiencies. And I've been asking that for a long time. And I was, well, that's just not the way it's done. That's just not the way it's done. And to me, that is the worst cop out ever. So, and that's, I guess that's, is if there's a yellow lining in this dark cloud of snow, it is, hey, we see the inefficiencies in the system and it requires us to act. So to that point, the second thing is how do you guys handle like this wind drift? So we had 2-3 snow dumps and then you get hit with high winds that create these berms and it creates stuff. So do those just get on hold till you're done? Do you have to go back? I mean, how do you trigger and how do the high winds that created another factor on top of this? How do those factor into it? How do you resolve with that? And then also we have abandoned vehicles. Because of the cost of towing and because of the cost, we ran short on money to get rid of vehicles. And so we knew we had a lot more disabled vehicles on the road. That was just a cost of inflation and towing costs and stuff. So we're behind the ball on that. How did those things attribute and how are you coping with those additional difficulties? Thank you.
So through the chair, when the high winds hit us here a week or so ago, we in one of the the interviews that I did, it stated that we shut down for 24 to 36 hours. We didn't shut down for 24 to 36 hours. We suspended snow hauling for that 24 hours so we could get back on our sidewalks and trails. Good portion of West Anchorage, Government Hill was basically 2 blocked. So we, to include behind the airport, I sent 2 blowers, 2 wings, and 2 graders out there just to get the Clitheroe Center open back up because of these wind drifts. So we lost about 24 hours in our regular operations to get these wind drifts taken care of. After that 24 hours, we went right back into our widening operations, which was hauling at night, all of our arterials collectors, and again, blowing back and hauling during the day shift. I guess the thing that impacted us the most in Northwest Anchorage was we lost some of the progress that we had made on some of the sidewalks and trails. That took us a couple of days to get caught up on. But other than that, the wind, other than the 24 hours to get kind of back where we were, to get people being able to travel from point A to point B, that's what we lost there. And the second question, I don't remember it.
To do with abandoned vehicles and how big of an issue that's been, given that we were short on our budget estimating what that was going to need due to inflation costs.
So every year we deal with abandoned vehicles in Anchorage, some up towards 350 to 500 abandoned vehicles every year throughout the Anchorage Bowl. Unfortunately, those in South Anchorage or some of the areas that are less dense they stay there because we're in North Mountain View, we're in Fairview, we're in places South Edition where it's more noticeable, more tighter. So that affects our snow removal operations in that. We work with APD and the CSOs right of way to tag those, post those in advance. But, you know, there's some pretty lenient codes on the books where if someone just move a vehicle 6 inches in 24 hours, they can start the clock over. So it's a game of cat and mouse that we continue to play, but it is a big impact to us. And now, especially with this amount of snowfall, they look like snowbanks out there. So every time one of my operators strikes a buried vehicle, we're calling HR, we're calling APD. We're basically shutting down that apparatus from anywhere from 2 to 3 hours by the time paperwork and things are done. So it hampers us all, and we continue to deal with it. And that's why we try and get out in the fall of the year and identify some of these cars that are out there that are problem areas. But every year it just seems to multiply, and it's just getting worse and worse with the economy.
Thank you. And Adam, you wanted to, or Mr. Trombley, you wanted to?
Yes, I just wanted to address Mr. Constance's question regarding payment for the under the contract. So the contracts were amended to change the geographical location. And then those drivers, depending on where they're plowing, those hours are tracked and then they're paid out of that. So if they're plowing in Chewacacre River, they're paid out of Subursa. If they're plowing in Anchorage in the ARTSA area, they're paid out of ARTSA. So that's how it's tracked. They identify where they're plowing or snow hauling.
How were the contracts amended? What's that process? I mean, aren't these contracts adopted by the Assembly? For sure, it's outside of the scope of a contract to provide plowing services outside of the service area. And so suddenly you have a new scope for a contract. Isn't it a new contract?
Technically, under Title VII, we're not changing the not to exceed amount, the date ranges on the contracts. So it is one of the amendments that's allowed under Title VII.
But you're changing the payment source.
Fund source is not one of the required Assembly approvals under Title VII.
Yeah, that's good to know.
I'll look it up.
Desiree, put that on the list.
Okay, back to the queue. Next is Mr. Solt, then Mr. Rivera, then Ms. Zalatel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So first, I just want to say thank you for all the efforts you're doing, your operators that have been working around the clock. I know none of them want to be in this position and are doing the absolute best they can, as well as all the private contractors out there doing their work as well. So 2 things. One, I just wanted maybe Paul or Saxon, you could expand on the private, what private contractors can do for snow dump, how that's going to expand. And then second, we talk to a lot of our citizens. We go to the community councils. What can we do to help with the current situation and then future snowfalls as far as, hey, get your vehicle off the street, put it in your driveway so we don't hit it, easier to plow, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you.
Through the chair, Mr. Solt, I'll speak to the private hauling snow dump first before I turn it over to Lance. To be respectful of the private contractors out there, we understand that frustration, especially to see trucks hauling all the way to Eagle River to dispose at the Eklutna pit. It's expensive. That's where your costs are at, is truck time. And so Development Services has been ahead of that issue. They've drafted an AO that will be coming your way. I think possibly Lance could speak to that in better detail. And it's just kind of in a draft status and review. And there's just the biggest challenge with establishing a snow dump site is really the risk and liability of contaminants. It's been industry wide. You kind of treat it as if it potentially could be contaminated because it follows all the SWIP and MS4 requirements for water monitoring and everything. The municipality historically doesn't accept private snow because of that risk. We try to control and mitigate our own risks, which is understandable because we're hauling from our properties, which we know what is on those properties. And so, and again, we're held accountable for these sites because they are monitored. And so that's the reason we don't accept private snow. I'll turn the last part over to Lance on developments of that private snow haul sites.
Through the chair, Mr. Salt. Yeah, so the ordinance that we've got prepared is basically allowing private property owners with a piece of parcel. It has to be, I think, over 30,000 square feet. There will be a restriction on the height of the amount of snow that can be there, the location of the snow to the borders of it. They have to be a certain distance away. There's going to be requirements for hours of operation. There'll basically be a required permit that will have to be done. And for those assembly members that will have experienced this in the past, it's a temporary solution. The permits will not be issued after May, and they will all terminate in August. And so they'll be required to, be cleaning up after those things. There'll be some basic care, and there's also the zoning requirements. There may be some places they will not be allowed, and some places they will be allowed. So all of those types of things will be identified in the proposed ordinance. But again, it's something that we've done in the past, and there's an appeal. There will be an appeal process, so it's not just a by right. If somebody wants to put it on their property and there is someone wants to appeal it, there will be an appeal process for that as well. So anyway, I think if that answers your question.
And just last piece, what can we do to help?
Yep.
Glad to go back in.
Oh, where can you help? Well, I think there's a couple places. First of all, I appreciate the emails that you guys have sent to me and the ones that you have responded to your constituents. We do not mind responding to them. We know that those things are difficult. Continuing to support, as the Assembly has done in the past, not only this administration, the previous and the Assembly has been supporting us budget-wise. The things that we need for equipment, the things that we need for personnel. I mean, if you can keep that support with us, we're going to apply it and deploy it to the best possible ways. If you have questions about what we're doing or how we're doing it, we'll certainly be willing to address those. We are, I think many have mentioned it before, our ability to, add capacity isn't always a money problem. Our ability to add capacity. Somebody listening.
Sorry, Lance. I think we need.
Nice.
If folks on the phone could please mute. Oh, it's not.
Is there anyone on the phone on the bridge? Can we mute them? There we go. Thank you.
There we go.
I'm on the phone, but that wasn't me.
So as I was saying, the Assembly, when we put the budget together, when we proposed our budget, we proposed it in October. The Assembly had approved it in November. That's when we had a lot of the increases that we have in our hauling and all of those things, and we were able to receive some additional funds to backfill that. We very much appreciate that. The ability to find operators, find equipment, the ability to just find the capacity is some of our challenges. So when we bring forward those to the administration and to the Assembly, we appreciate your support on those things. And again, if you have questions on those, but we're not going to ask for things that we can't really pull off, because if we do that and you do support that, some other portion is not going to be doing that. So I think that's what I have to add, and maybe Saxon or Paul have something to add, but I think that's where you can help us the most right now is, and to Ms. Salatel's point, letting the folks know that we are doing the best. And one of the most challenging things we're facing in some of our questions is that a lot of the concerns are on facilities that are not inside the Anchorage roads and service area that we're responsible for, or they are not our facilities. And so that doesn't matter. We still try to respond to them as positively as we can.
Go ahead, Ms. Christensen.
Thank you, Ms. LaFrance. Blair Christensen, Acting Municipal Attorney. I just wanted to provide some follow-up sites. So 715-070 outlines the permitted amendments that do not have to go through assembly approval. And then 715-080 outlines contract amendments that do require assembly approval. And all of those 715-080 outlines when you're exceeding the not to exceed amount already approved by the assembly, basically.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Rivera, then Ms. Alatel. I put myself in the queue, and then Mr. Constant.
Thanks. So my questions are going to be of a different nature. I want to be a little bit future focused. So I think, to echo what a lot of my colleagues have said, the assembly is here to support street maintenance and trying to do the best job that you all can to support our constituents. I think, like Mr. Solt said, we spend quite a lot of time in our community councils recently talking about snow plowing. And I just know that over the years, there is a realistic disparity between the expectation of our constituents and the reality. So with that, I want to focus on the future. And I think the future is a little bit nebulous because I think, as we heard recently in news reports, a state climatologist has been talking about how precipitation is going to be increasing in the winter, and we're going to have more of these, not less. So I want to know, from the administration's standpoint, what are we doing to prepare for the future? Are we preparing for the future? Are we in status quo mode? I want to understand that. And I will just add a couple of notes. Whenever I talk to my constituents about snow plowing, I do state that there are probably some collaborations and efficiencies that we can attain. Mr. Cross talked a lot about working with the state. I continue to believe that there are ways that we can make those collaborations better. Hopefully that's achieved one of these years. But I'm also pretty blunt that some of this is also a money issue, right? And we have to decide what's the appropriate level of service that we want, and then we got to be able to pay for that appropriate level of service. So also, in addition, whenever there's a state legislator in the room, I also tend to add the fact that it would be great if we got away from this two-model system and have some type of unified model system. And of course, whenever I mention that, a state legislator tends to chuckle. I don't know if it's a good thing or bad thing. So I would love to hear from the administration. Again, what are we doing to change things into the future, or are we in status quo mode? And can you talk a little bit about some of the collaborations or efficiencies that we can attain by working better with the state? And are there plans to do that? I know every year there is a confab, I don't know what the official term is, between the state and the MOA. Tends to be employees who go to that to talk about, what happened last winter, what can we do better? But I think we've learned this last year that our constituents want more. They want to see more results. And so any ideas or thoughts that you guys have, I think would be helpful. Thank you.
Through the chair, Mr. Rivera, the mayor's already indicated that there's going to be an after-action report. That's not going to happen immediately because we don't want to take resources off the street right now. But as far as what does think of it as an operational plan in the future. It says, hey, we have a snow event, 1, 2, or 3. What do we do in those cases? Do we need additional term contractors on on the ready that we don't currently have. So that is going to take place. It's going to be an operational plan. And when that's completed, we'll absolutely share that with the assembly. But right now, our focus is just making sure we clear the snow now. And then once that's completed, we'll have that roundtable after action report. And then in regards to your second question, the collaboration and efficiencies, I'll probably turn that over to Saxton or Lance.
Through the chair, Mr. Rivera, I'd like to speak to, the accusations that we were underfunded or didn't see this coming, the heavy snowfall, being understaffed, underprepared. And again, this kind of comes back to Mr. Constant's comment that the assembly, there were accusations there, and it simply was not true either on the administrative or the administration's fault. We saved 5% when the administration came on early on, and street maintenance was not touched through those budget cuts. In fact, we had a lot of support from the administration to make sure that we had what we need to go into the year to meet the 84-hour plow out. So we felt fully supported going in to that first winter. Now we're in our second winter of this administration. And again, we feel the support. There's a lot of good talks happening, especially with AMATs, with 14 new tracklisses coming on. We expect to receive those in September of 23. And so there's a lot of work being done to make sure that we can meet the match, to order those, to have those here in time. So we should see a significant difference, a quality of snow removal for those pedestrians and access trailways. So that there's some good things happening there. There's certainly things that can be done better that we're doing now. And as far as the future talks, we are discussing on potentially maybe integrating different types of equipment, especially with what we experienced late last winter with the ice and the temperatures, the thaw, the icing at night. It was pretty hard on the graders. And you probably remember there was a significant number of graders that went down because that same equipment runs for day shift. It also runs for night shift. That equipment does not get a break. And so the hours, we're averaging high hours on this equipment, and it gets a lot of use. So we are getting ahead of that in our future talks as well. I'll turn it over to Paul to speak on the overlap with AKDOT.
Through the chair, my staff and I converse, if not weekly, bi-weekly with the staff over at DOT. Simply put, priorities are different. They have the Glen, they have the new sewer, they have Minnesota, things like that. We support them the best that they can, and they support us. We work together. We mostly on the night shift on sharing of snow sites. We coordinate snow hauls with them so we can work together there. We talked about us being a little shorthanded. The DOT is drastically understaffed for their tasks. So we work together and try and support them the best that we can. Just recently as last week, our groups were working on some of their main intersections, getting some of those things peeled down to help them out. But I do agree with you that there is some collaboration that can be done, and we've been working on that. This is my 27th winter. We've been working on this for 27 winters. All right. And so at some point in time, some people are going to have to sit down, and we're just going to have to look it out, draw it out on a map, and figure out what's best for the community. And until that happens, we're going to continue to see some of these inefficiencies across the board. Just different philosophies, different ways of doing things, and we need to continue to work together and hopefully find benefits as we continue to do so.
Great. Just final comment, Madam Chair. Thank you. Thanks for all of that. That's really helpful. And I am heartened to hear that there is a realization that we really do need just to come to the table, sit down, lock the door, and not leave until we figure this out. Right. I mean, that's basically what I'm hearing. And so I think this year has pushed us to the limits of what our constituents are able to tolerate, frankly, right? So I think this has hopefully provided an impetus for us to really look at the future. And I really hope that everyone is coming to a realization that as our climate changes, our system needs to change as well. And I don't think we can hide from that anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Next is Ms. Elatel.
Thank you. So I want to talk about contract amendments for just a second, but before that, I want to just state what I think we've had to state multiple times. When we passed the budget for 23, while we were passing the budget, we learned the administration's budget did not have enough money for snow plowing. It only had enough snow plowing with the amendment brought forward by the Assembly. It would have otherwise been over $1 million short. And then we added additional funding. I think we need to stay really clear on that because we want a clear fiscal picture of what snow plowing is costing because it is a core service we provide. On contract amendments, I looked at 715-070. I see nothing about the fund source. I see that it can only be amended for the following reasons without Assembly approval, and it's to change quantity ordered or date of delivery, the scope of a project, and some other things. It absolutely says nothing about the fund source in A through F, and I don't know how we reconcile that without getting a fund certification from the CFO under 715-090 for the contract amendments because you're changing the fund source. Like, how do we know that you're spending other funds if we're not told about it and or asked to approve it? Like, I'm having a hard time reconciling the code sections.
Through the chair to Ms. Salatel, this is Blair Christensen. So I think we're confusing appropriations with contract approval, first of all. So for appropriations, certainly you guys, appropriations are done by fund and purpose. But for contracts, you're approving the terms of the contract and the amounts of the contract, but not the funds. That is not an essential term of a contract.
Well, it says under 715-090, no contract amendment that will increase the contract price can be done without a fund certification.
We did not, and that's what I.
So you used the Subursa and LURSA contracts under their full amounts. You didn't increase the prices. You just moved them to the ARTSA.
Correct. We did not increase the not to exceed amounts on the contract.
So then where's the Subursa and LURSA monies? I mean, it's not paid for. We never appropriated ARTSA monies for that purpose. We're missing a step.
Through the chair, I don't believe so. Through the chair, I don't believe so. So all the time throughout the municipality, when we spend money, right, we are moving monies around through different mechanisms, right? And so contracts are not approved. You do not approve a contract as to a specific fund. You're approving the essential terms of the contract and the not to exceed amounts. Your appropriations, you're approving funds, but this does not have to do with appropriation. And so a fund is not an essential term of the contract, and it's not a term that's being approved, right? When we sign a contract with a vendor, there's no fund in that contract.
It's subject to appropriations.
Right. That is correct. It is subject to appropriations, but that's not Title VII.
I hope what happens in the near future is that there is an AIM filed with the Assembly that details what has happened, because this is really hard to track. It seems very abnormal, and we really need to see that. And then I don't know who's approving the shift of what I guess we would have anticipated the fund source to have been. Is that a purchasing approval? Is that happening within maintenance and operations? I guess I don't know that. Like, who's making that call that we're going to use a contract from here, from a Subursa or LURSA, from the Subursa or LURSA to do work in the ARTSA, because we wouldn't anticipate that happening. It's not budgeted, yeah. And that's where I'm getting lost. We didn't plan on this. And so how are we getting knowledge that it's happening and where the money is coming from and how it fits in the overall budgetary picture?
Through the chair to Ms. Zalatel, I believe that's a question for OMB. I would just say that under the Title VII contracting provisions, that at least pursuant to the thought of the legal department, C, which says to change the scope of a project or the scope of services or professional services under a contract.
C only applies to construction contracts. There's construction modifier throughout all of C.
But also you can change the quantity ordered. I would say also, Mr. Shearer pointed out to me that our contract already allows us to change. It already has provisions in there that allows us to change the areas in which they're snow hauling. And so the contract language already is incorporated in there. But additionally, if you look at 080 contract amendments that are required assembly approval, all of that has to do with the not to exceed amount. And we did not amend any of the not to exceed amounts.
So I just want to finish this conversation with this point. When we are asked to approve a contract, we approve it on a single sheet of paper. We don't have the contract. It has a title. That title in our minds constrains what that contract is for. And it will say for a Subversa or a LRSA, it'll say subject to appropriation. And it's what's on that paper. That is the expectation we have with that contract. If it otherwise suggests, particularly for snow plowing now, that it could go to other areas outside of that, I think that's an essential term. You should probably let us know when we approve those contracts. Thanks.
Through the chair, Ms. Saltel, I'd like to clarify, you were referencing snow plowing. I believe you mean snow hauling. The contract for increasing, it's just a separate contract, that's all. The snow hauling contract, what you were referencing went in front of the assembly in fall of 22. Our apparent low bidder had withdrew their bid within the 45-day window. We needed to work with the assembly because unfortunately number 2 is a significant amount higher. So in order to have that contract in place for our use, we came to the assembly for those funds. And so that's what you're referencing. We were forced into that situation and came to the assembly for that amount. I believe that was for 1.8 million. So I believe that's what you were referencing.
I'm sorry, through the chair to Ms. Alto, if I could make a correction, I'm sorry, I said C and I meant B, to change the quantity of services or professional services to be rendered, or to change the scope of a project under a contract for services or professional services where necessary to meet unforeseen changes in municipal requirements.
Okay, I just want to call attention to time. We are scheduled until 3:40. It's 3:39. I'm hoping folks can stay a few minutes longer since we got started late. I put myself in the queue. And I could also use some clarification on the funding sources for those contracts that are for specific service areas, just to make absolutely clear, because it's a lot to track here, that general government work is being funded with general government dollars versus those in a particular service area. You don't agree with clarification?
No, I want the clarification. I believe, according to the contracts that we have, Subversa, Chugiak, and Eagle River, and the South Anchorage Road Service area are very generously plowing Anchorage's or hauling Anchorage's snow for us. And their contribution to the municipality of Anchorage is exquisite, and we are grateful.
We are grateful, and I can tell you firsthand that the LRSAs and VERSAs of District 6, and I imagine it's true for Subversa, are amazing and wonderful to work with. The point I was making is I would appreciate just some clarification so I can track where those dollars are being funded. And if service area organizations are shouldering some of the burden for general government areas, then I think there will need to be some kind of reconciliation of funding. Oh, go ahead.
We had exactly this conversation with acting city manager Kent Coles. This was a concern to him. Right now he's on scheduled leave. If he was here, I'm sure he could have exactly spoke to the details of this. And so we have something draft ready to explain the exact situations. I will add, but won't completely answer your question, unfortunately, but we have contract administrators for each contract area. So we have very detailed accounting of these costs and where those monies come from and where services are received. So we are feeding that accounting so we can attach to each contract. So, but I know this is draft ready for the assembly, and this was a major concern to the acting city manager. He had exactly this concern. And I imagine we're going to be seeing that draft to you very soon.
Okay, great. I'll look forward to that. And I had actually intended to start by saying thank you for the responses to the emails and helping me to provide information to constituents. I really appreciate that. I wanted to reiterate, as my colleagues have, that we're here to help. If there are more resources available, as I've said before and others have said, please let us know. We only have the information that the administration shares with us. And so don't hesitate if there is some way in which the Assembly can help. And as Ms. Zelatel noted, Mr. Dunbar and Ms. Quinn Davidson had brought forward an amendment to add snow removal budget that was passed by the Assembly. And I also want to make just very, very clear for the record that the Assembly did not reduce or deny any snow removal, snow plowing funding. I want to be absolutely clear about that. Mr. Constant spoke to the capital aspects. Again, please tell us how we can help. I know you all are very well acquainted with the concerns concerning pedestrian safety, especially those who are part of the disabled community, student safety as school starts up, mail, trash service. And so whatever you can do to help us provide more information to our constituents. Grateful for that. As I mentioned in yesterday's committee meeting, I'm particularly interested in TORA's transfer of responsibility agreements with the state. We get a lot of questions. Why isn't Huffman plowed, or DeArmond, or Rabbit Creek, O'Malley? Those are all state roads. And a lot of times people are really surprised to find that out. And then to Mr. Rivera's point about future incidents, I am particularly interested in how we scale up for emergencies. Call this what you will, semantics. In my view, when a situation exceeds the resources available and raises concerns about public safety and well-being, I think it's an emergency, quite frankly. And rain happens all the time, and when it's a flood, that's an emergency. So whatever you call it, I think that there definitely needs to be a way to quickly scale up for emergencies. And I don't know if, I guess I'll end with a question. Do we have, or does the administration have a plan for an emergency plan, or whatever you want to call it, for responding to these kinds of major snow events?
I will do a two-parter. So I think the mechanism to bring on additional resources through the contracting is the first level. I think, as Mr. Trombley mentioned, one of the things we're going to be doing is sort of an after action, because this event was unusual. And what did we learn? What would we have done differently? What would we have put in place? Did we make decisions that we could have made sooner? Did we make decisions that we could have done more? I'm confident that we have pulled every lever that within our ability to get as many resources on the ground as soon as possible. Basically starting on December 5th or 6th, whenever we had the heavy snow. So we will all be learning from it, and we will get better at it.
Thank you, Mr. Wilburn. I just wanted to end with, thank you. I recognize that you all and your teams are working around the clock, and we're in this together. We are all, I believe, united around that desire to ensure that streets and sidewalks are safe and clear. And I'm sure if we lock ourselves in a room for however long you said, Mr. Rivera, as long as there's a lot of food and coffee, it'll be fine, or at least it'll be productive. Thank you. Mr. Constant, you're in the queue next.
Thank you. I have so many questions still, and we're almost out of time. But the determination that the cost hasn't changed and therefore the scope can, I'll be very interested in monitoring very closely that, and look forward to seeing the contracts, because we have some experience with this administration telling us late in the game that a small contract has been awarded, but then a bunch of money has been spent, or at least work has been done for money that we probably have to figure out a way to pay. And so we have some experience in knowing that that's at least a one-time method of operation. And so the sections of code that were referenced that do require assembly approval are all based on, at this time, until the future, soon enough, exceeding amounts in a contract. And so I think now, to the first contractor that was mentioned, who is a Subursa contractor, that contract had a maximum amount, and there is an amount allowed to be exceeded, and then up to that amount, beyond that amount, it requires assembly approval. And I'll say on the record right now, if it comes back to us in the next weeks or months that those snow hauling contracts exceeded their amount that was authorized under the initial contract by the amount that requires assembly approval, then the contractor will be on the hook for their own expenses, because loosey-goosey contracting is not acceptable. Now, as Ms. LaFrance suggested, there was an easy way around all of this. And that was for the mayor to do what he needed to do, which was to declare that we had an actual emergency. Yes, when we have rain, it's raining, but when we have a flood, that's rain that causes a crisis. That's an excellent metaphor. Then the code allows flexibility in staffing and procurement. So then none of this looks suspicious or following a pattern that we've previously seen that provides those of us who have a due diligence to the taxpayers of this city to mind the fisc. So that's all in the management, the contracting. That has nothing to do with the hard workers who've been out there busting their tail for weeks at a time without sleep over holidays and getting the job done. They're the heroes in this story, and I'm really grateful for them. I'm a little bit bummed that we've canceled Nixle and moved to Rave, because Rave looks to be an E911 system, more of a emergency reports only, because I had been in discussions, we had discussed a little bit of the possibility of coming up with a notification system for snow management that sends out notifications when the snow plows are coming through, some trigger is hit. You're texted, because we all have this tool now, that says in the next 24 hours, your street will be plowed or hauled or whatever. People will move their vehicles if they know there's an opportunity, and then that will save you so much time and allow your team to get more sleep. And so we can do better. Again, we have the money and we're here for you, but we need it to be accounted for in a way that we can understand and communicate to our constituencies.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Go ahead.
Through the chair and everyone attending, before we end today, I just would make it clear that the operators have done an exceptional job. They did last winter, I believe we worked 28 days straight before we provided a day off. Paul Van Landingham required the operators to take Christmas off. And it was a nice gift for the operators to be with their families. At that point, they had worked 21 days straight without a break into that storm. And so I'm very proud of the leadership here. We are all very appreciative and thankful to have the continuity of so many years in this position. Paul knows what works best. He knows where we can improve. We have the continuity here in a position. We're not dealing with a green operation here. We've got some great leads underneath Paul and some great operators and more coming on. Appreciative of the 302, but those workers are very proud of the services they provide. They live in our community. They are our neighbors across town. They also feel the pinch points when roads are not ideal. And so we hear it from them directly. And it's a very good team, and they're very proud of the services they provide to their community as well. So, when schools are shut down and their kids can't go to school and they have to find alternative kid care so they can make it to work, we feel that pain too. I have kids, our operators have kids, and so we're members of the community too, but very proud to work with the staff that we work with at Street Maintenance. I'm very lucky and fortunate to work with Paul Van Landingham. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't have any other members in the queue, and we are over our scheduled time. So I just wanted to say thank you all for being here, members of the administration, for this discussion. Thank you to members of the assembly and the public for being here. And with that, I can rest the gavel back. We are adjourned.